the IDFC had been supporting members in mainstream common principles on mitigation and adaptation, developing a framework for the operationalization of the Paris Agreement alignment, promoting a mentoring program between institutions, delivering climate toolbox including GHG accounting, climate risk assessment, Paris Agreement alignment and climate strategy, offering trainings on climate risk assessment, climate strategies, and adaptation, supporting events and partnerships to the international agenda, mobilizing resources and facilitating.
Good morning. Delighted to welcome you for our discussion on Ocean Day at COP28 on the linkages, the opportunities for development finance in the blue economy. How do we achieve positive ocean action? And I think this is such a key topic, and we will have 3 rounds of panels to discuss it from different perspectives. We will have a first panel from a development finance institution perspective, and we have 3 institutions with us that are leading in this space, that have committed to work on ocean positive action, taking ecosystems as the core milestone, the biodiversity component as well as the climate component into account as they progress their financing and scale up their financing for this critical blue economy space. We then will have a second round from perspectives from the non-profit civil society space, from experts of what these ecosystems are all about, and learn about their focus. And then we will follow up with, again, 2 panelists who are real experts around some of these blue instruments, the tools that we need in order to deliver that, and the types of partnerships. How do we engage public and private sector to actually deliver on this ocean finance agenda? So I will ask now my first 3 panelists to join me on stage. We will open this panel with Ignacio Lorenzo Arena, who recently joined CAF, the Latin American Development Bank. And CAF is a very exciting, regionally focused institution that very early on made it very clear that they see themselves as the green development bank and increasingly as the blue development bank. So that's very exciting, and we really look forward to hearing from Ignacio. Barbara Schnells joins us from the German Kreditanstalt für Wiederaufbau, KfW. Again, great expertise around the world in supporting development finance, and an early actor in this blue space, ranging from the work KfW does with the Blue Action Fund to support very concrete biodiversity type projects in a whole range of countries, but also being a major funder both for governments and for the private sector in this development finance space. And then our third panelist is Romain Chabrol from the French AFD, Agence Française du Développement. Again, a leading thinker. In fact, the whole Finance and Commons initiative that brings, I think it's now over 520 development finance institutions together, is driven by the work of AFD, and Romain in particular brings the biodiversity perspective into this discussion and is driving the thought leadership in this space. So I'm really delighted to have all 3 of you here with me. And I will start with you, Ignacio. CAF as the Blue Bank, how do you approach this space?
Thank you so much, and good morning. It's great to be here, and it's a great opportunity by IDFC to celebrate this Ocean Day, having this conversation and to look forward new partnerships, new innovative solutions to assist the ocean in this current landscape of opportunities and crises as well. For CAF, as I was introduced back in Glasgow, we have our first strategic decision to become the Green Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean by introducing our goal of 40% green finance by 2026. We have a yearly approval of $15 billion, so actually it's a great amount of green finance going to the region. And the first thing is that we consider that green finance in a very complex integrated approach, where it's not only mitigation but adaptation and resilience as well, biodiversity and ecosystems, also resource management. We were speaking earlier, we have a new conversation later today about nature and climate finance and integration, and we are seeing that around quite a lot. Then last year on the Ocean Conference, our executive president also indicated to all staff and also worldwide that we wanted also to be the blue bank of Latin America and the Caribbean. So green and blue, and that is our logo as well. So how that we can better approach the ocean economy, the blue economy, and also to support in the context of sustainability. So in that regard, we established a goal of $1.25 billion by 2026 in terms of investments in blue economy, supporting our member countries, and that also together with what we call as a decalogue of blue commitments. The first is to establish the bridge and synergies among institutions, to take a look what are the leading institutions back in a region that know ocean issues, that have the data, that have also the portfolios to deliver on results in terms of ocean. Of course, the goal in terms of finance, the relationship between blue and green and how we mainstream that. We are an infrastructure bank, mainly an infrastructure bank, so how we can mainstream blue and green into our infrastructure development to better understand and better conceive this infrastructure going into the future. Also, the supporting of neighboring environments, the sustainable ocean plans. We're working with governments in the region to develop these ocean plans in order for these investments to be well anchored in an overall ocean policy. Also, developing our own capacities at CAF to better deliver on ocean issues. We are integrating new expertise for managing our portfolios, not only in new blue operations, but also the idea of mainstreaming sustainable blue into our whole portfolio. Also project acceleration, I will speak to some of those in a minute, capacity building in our countries as well, and also in other finance institutions, and of course supporting the big frameworks, both global biodiversity, coral reefs, and later, for example, a couple of days ago, also joining the mangrove breakthrough. So somehow assisting these coalitions, bringing partnerships, and also developing new ideas. So what are the main areas of work we're doing, and we also want to do much more? Is of course conservation, restoration, sustainable use, adaptation and resilience, energy transition in oceans, pollution prevention, marine spatial planning, innovative blue finance, sustainable tourism, sustainable ports. Just 1 second on this sustainable ports issue is that we are seeing, of course, a region in development, the new infrastructures that are coming that needs both resilience and sustainable design. This is quite complex in terms of the knowledge, the data, the understanding in the way that these infrastructures are being designed and used in sometimes in quite fragile contexts in terms of sea level rise, also ecosystems. Global biodiversity framework, the sargassum, which is also a quite relevant issue for the Caribbean. We're also growing. Last year, our bank was also enlarged by incorporating the Caribbean as well. So we're now Latin American and Caribbean. So sargassum is quite an issue, and of course, innovative and clean marine technologies. Just to end, just of some of the projects we are now developing. waste management and ocean in Colombia, fishing technologies in Argentina, tropical marine, Pacific marine corridor, CEMAR, with several countries in Latin America, coral reefs in the Caribbean. We just approved last week a project with many Caribbean countries on blue economy priorities through marine spatial planning, so trying to connect public policy, but also opportunities for development. Blue Corridor in Ecuador, Sargassum in the Great Caribbean, also we announced this 2 days ago with the leadership of Mexico and many other countries to have better knowledge of the Sargassum issue and try to find ways to control and also even have somehow sustainable use of that. And of course, supporting the Joint Declaration of the Americas in Ocean Protection, support of the Ocean 2030 Coalition, and as again, the mangrove breakthrough. So we're trying to move the agenda as fast as we can, try to invest and move forward. Indeed, it's quite challenging to get this 1.25 billion for 2026, but for that we need to build these strong networks and try to get to the portfolios on ground and the capacities on ground to deliver. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed. I think that was a really impressive list. And it's so exciting to see how you are integrating the external work that's going on in various places into that development pathway. Because if we take, for example, you referred to the Sustainable Ocean Plans. We have the work from the high-level panel on the Sustainable Ocean Economy. And the Sustainable Ocean Plans are really a great tool to integrate nature-based solutions, to integrate technology innovation into an approach to ocean finance that fully values the climate component and the biodiversity component. So that's a wonderful, wonderful work, and I know that some countries in your region are particularly advanced in making this work. So really exciting news. You mentioned the mangrove breakthrough. The high-level champions in another room will today announce their financial roadmap that goes with these mangrove breakthroughs and this ambitious commitment of 4 billion investment in that blue natural capital space that are the mangroves. And that really gives clear guidance and a pathway for a lot of people to rally around. We have great science already in that space. We have a real concentration of that type of partnership that you mentioned that is required to bring this over the line. And I think there's a critical role for development finance institutions because this is about development, and the livelihoods component that come out of development are a key part of that. And in particular, your reference to infrastructure, because that is obviously a core expertise that development finance institutions bring to the table. But infrastructure in that coastal and marine zone has to be rethought very significantly in this context of climate change, of coastal resilience, and that is exactly the work you're doing. And so in setting some of these nature-based solutions into these types of developments is a really important part. And ports play a critical role in using the wetlands as part of the system of thinking larger, thinking more about the coastscapes, thinking beyond the pure physical infrastructure to the broader integration of nature into these processes. So now I'm delighted to introduce Barbara Schnelz, and you head the sector policy development at KfW. And so we're really interested to hear from you how KfW approaches this really exciting but not easy ocean challenge.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very, very pleased to be on this panel because KfW, on behalf of the German government, funds a lot of biodiversity and focused on protection areas. We are one of the largest bilateral donors, Germany is, for the benefit of nature. And it's a few years back that we have identified marine protection as one very exciting focal area needing our attention. And we do marine protection really two ways. We indirectly preserve the oceans by improving waste management and sewage management near coastal areas. And I'm not going to talk about that, it that much today. I'm going to focus on our direct support for the protection of our oceans. And we do that by dedicated programs, including sustainable aquaculture and fisheries, and also coastal protection through mangroves. And I'm going to introduce our small portfolio. It's a portfolio which grows by between 100 million euros to 250 million euros a year over the last 3 years. And in order to also support these activities, we signed the Sustainable Blue Economy Initiative in June 2021, calling for mobilization of more funding, and also the Finance in Common Summit statement in Cartagena, Colombia, and the call for action for the blue economy financing. So we are part of this coalition you have also mentioned before. So our small, distinct portfolio, we try to also include private sector in that. And one of our funds, which is most important in that specific regard, is the Eco Business Fund. That's a collaboration with the private sector. It's a fund which invests in sustainable business model, and amongst others also aquaculture and fisheries. All of our companies who are investees of this fund, they are certified through, if they are in the forest areas, Rainforest Alliance, but if they are in the fisheries area through MSC and ASC, so official certificates. And our ocean-based portfolio makes up about a fifth of the overall portfolio of this fund. So we think this is a very good approach, because it supports sustainable business models and revenue streams and includes the private sector in our efforts. And then we have the Blue Action Fund. You already mentioned it. That was launched in 2016. That was actually the first very, very visible outcome of our push for marine protection. And that the aim of this fund, where we also have gathered support from AFD, from Sweden, from Ireland, is really to support programs preserving oceans of NGOs, such that they can widen their activities and reach more people and more protection areas that way. And that Blue Action Fund is very successful. There's a lot of applications from NGOs for their specific projects, and we are happy that we can directly work with NGOs that way. Yeah, and then we also have a couple of other funds in other regions. For instance, the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund that provides long-term funding for existing and new marine protected areas. The fund supports national funds in order to support nature-based climate adaptation measures, as well as also circular economy approaches in these areas. And then we have the Mesoamerican Reef Fund. That's another good example. It ranges what its activities are concerned from Mexico over Belize to Guatemala, Honduras, and supports the coastal and marine protection areas in that very important region around the Mesoamerican Reef. And likewise, the Pacifico Fund supports tropical Eastern Pacific protection areas. And then we have a very large bilateral portfolio also in various countries, like Ecuador, like Indonesia. In Indonesia, we support mangroves. We support the work of the World Mangrove Center. And we like to work in Indonesia because the Indonesian government always takes care of including the local population into their protection activities. So sustainable management of fishing zones and maritime protected areas is part of the work there. And so you see there is a number of funds in which we are active. If you talk about challenges, I personally think one challenge is that they are funded mostly by grants. Grants are very, very limited, and also they are very distinct initiatives. So I think what we need to work on is really finding models where we generate revenue streams, and ultimately also find ways to link it to capital markets, be it through carbon credits, that's the most popular mean I can think of. Or another thing is also debt for nature swaps. I find that very promising, and also the role development banks can play in providing guarantees for cheaper debt, and then dedicating the savings to protected areas, including marine protected areas. I find that also quite compelling, and KfW still has to find a role in these models, providing guarantees, etc. So we need to work on that, and we need to bundle our activities, really, learn from each other, collaborate intensively, and this is really the goal of the initiatives we are supporting, which we will learn about in our session today, as far as I understand. So I'll leave it at that for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And indeed, KfW is a really interesting institution in that it has a lot of scope. You have the grant side, you have the lending side, you have the ability to work directly with private sector in emerging economies. I had the pleasure of speaking at the first of your development finance events you've run for a long time, but this was the first one purely dedicated to ocean, and that was probably 2016 or so.
Yeah.
So it really shows how this agenda can be embedded inside of development finance institution and then taken forward. And I loved your list of challenges, because that's exactly the type of discussion we can have here. And of course, this is also embedded in the broader German contribution to the space. We have this whole ICI initiative, a very large funding around climate solutions. Germany signed 2 days ago, I guess it was, with the EBRD, a guarantee structure where the lending from the development finance institution goes into the emerging market projects. The finance institution takes that risk, but the private sector partner that comes along receives some guarantee protection. So there are all these models, and it's a great way forward. So Romain, if we move to you, your focus is biodiversity and the ocean. You're driving this process, but you're also are sitting in an institution. France at Brest had a significant commitment to this ocean space. We have a UN Ocean Conference coming up in 2025, led by France and Costa Rica, where we really need to deliver ocean action at scale. So we have an exciting, important pathway here. So over to you.
So it's a lot of responsibility for us. So I'm glad we are all together to do this. Yes, thank you, Thorsten, and thank you all for being there. I'd like just to mention that this is the first time we have a side event dedicated to blue finance and blue economy on this IDFC pavilion during a COP. So it's certainly a sign that this topic is growing importance. We still have a lot to do, but yeah, I think it's a good sign. It's true that for us, development finance institution, this topic so far has been maybe overlooked, maybe not identified, forgotten. It's true that it's very cross-cutting, very transversal, so not that easy to integrate in our portfolio and in our strategies. However, it should be reminded that ocean protection is a development issue, and this is very important for us. When we're talking about ocean protection, we're talking about sustainable mobility, sustainable food, food security, but also resilience of coastal communities. So it's a very important topic for us. And also because ocean is a carbon sink, a major source of oxygen, and a massive climate thermostat. So again, very important. So at AFD, what we have done so far, we've adopted a dedicated ocean strategy in 2019, and ocean-related projects are today about 7% of our total portfolio. Let's say that in 2022, it was 881 million euros with about 40 projects. So maybe more importantly, in these global commitments, 61% of these global commitments are from projects with biodiversity co-benefits. And I think, again, my focus here is mostly on biodiversity. So basically, these projects are loans or grants for mangrove protection, for coastal adaptation in the Pacific Islands, but also eco-ports, let's say in Indonesia, for instance, where we have a very big portfolio, or coastal infrastructure for solid waste treatments, in, let's say in Togo or in many other African countries. So a lot of different sectors, a lot of different interventions. What we have so far, and I will very quickly come to challenges, remaining challenges, because I think it's an important part of the topic. We have an initial framework, but we have a sectorial approach. So what we miss is a more detailed framework, and that will be part of the work of this new coalition launched in September. We need a more detailed framework. We need targets, financial targets. At AFD, we have financial targets regarding biodiversity, regarding climate finance, for sure. We don't have anything specific to ocean. So we need targets. We need to go beyond sectors. The sectoral approach is very classical to this. We know how to do that, but we need to go beyond sectors. And for this, of course, we have to work with public policy loan. We know how to do this. We've had at AFD some public policy loan dedicated to ocean protection in Costa Rica, Ecuador, and we're working with KfW on a very interesting public policy loan on marine pollution in Indonesia as well. Very interesting project. So we need also, and I'm glad that TNC is with us today, we need to develop a little bit more, you mentioned it, Barbara, some specific financial blue tools. We are very new to this. Just like you, we are working a little bit on blue carbon credits. It's still new, but we need to do some efforts and explore blue bonds and debt for nature swap as well. Still looking for the proper positioning and strategy on these tools. And we also need dedicated initiatives. And in this regard, I'm very glad to announce that we participated in the launching of a new partnership, the Blue Mediterranean Partnership, which was launched last Saturday here in Dubai. This is a very important initiative led by EBRD, and AFD made the first 2 million contribution to the implementation fund of this Blue Med partnership. Now, I've already said we have a lot to do, and the good news is that we have a political agenda supported by France. We are a bilateral bank and agency, so of course when there is a political agenda from the French government, this is of course very important for us. So Thorsten, you said it, France organized in 2022 this first Ocean Summit. This was the first summit dedicated to ocean protection in France, a very interesting summit, and France is committed to do more and will be organizing with Costa Rica the next UN Ocean Conference in Nice in 2025. So towards UNOC there is an important path, a lot of things to do, and a lot of demand from the French government. The expectation from Costa Rican and French team is high. They want this next UNOC in Nice to be as important for ocean as the Paris COP in 2015 was. So a lot of ambition. Of course, the context is a little bit different, but a lot of ambition. So this is great news again. In the run-up to Nice, AFD, of course, will be involved in one of the 3 pillars of this next UNOC summit. You know that there will be 3 pillars, one on science, one on coastal cities adaptation, and one on blue finance. And so, of course, we will contribute mostly to the last one. And there will be, for this, a dedicated pre-summit in Monaco, the 7th and 8th June 2025. So, of course, this road from Brest to Nice, let's say, is important for us, and it's the opportunity for all AFD group, including Expertise France, including Proparco, to have a global roadmap for the group, bringing in all the sectors, all the geographies, with commitments, sectorial priorities, and dedicated tools. So this is a very interesting roadmap for us. So on the way to Nice, the coordination with our colleagues and partners from other development banks is critical, and this is the reason why we launched with EIB and of course with CAF and CAFW this new call for action at the last FIC summit in September in Cartagena. This is, I think, an important point. Again, the first time that we talked about blue finance in a Finance in Common Summit, so pretty new. We still have a lot to do, but the purpose of this call for action is to encourage public development banks to do better and give them the tools to do so. And the commitments from the 9 banks signing this call in September was to create a specific working group and work on a common roadmap to be presented in Nice. So it sounds not much, but for us, it's important. So this roadmap, what's the intention? The intention is to identify the main gaps and opportunities for development banks and coordinate on this. I think one of the main expected outcome is to work on a common framework. This is, I think, a very important point, because when we are talking about sustainable economy, sustainable blue economy, ocean economy, nobody's talking about the same thing. So we could agree on something. We could build on what has already been done by EIB, by the Asiatic Development Bank as well. There's been a lot of work on this. So defining the scope and defining the sustainability criteria regarding biodiversity, regarding resilience, regarding climate. So maybe trying to define, this is what we expect, what is white, light blue, and maybe deep blue. That would be a huge progress. Defining as well impact indicators. We all have them. So again, we will build on existing work. Try to identify what is ocean finance tracking, how to track ocean finance, and maybe so that we have a little bit of accountability of ocean finance within our institutions. So, and we hope also to, within this coalition, have some knowledge experience on blue finance. I've already said this, but also on some strategic sectors that we are trying to develop. So again, this roadmap, the working group to be set up, will be an important contribution for PDBs for UNOC. One last word to conclude. This call for action is a call for action to have positive action for the ocean. I think this is very important because it calls for a renewed vision of blue economy. Why a renewed vision? Because so far, we now have to build on the global biodiversity framework. And building on the biodiversity framework implies to go beyond neutrality. We cannot just be neutral. So we have to go beyond our common E and S safeguards and try to get net gains for nature, net gains for the ocean. That's the main result we expect from this coalition and the common work we will do together. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Romain. And indeed, the Cartagena event, which had a full room of participation and interest from all participants there, was really a key guiding moment, because it is critical that the development and finance institutions use their arsenal of tools and capacity and public and government support to crowd in this broader universe, to be a thought leader and an action leader in this space. And I think what we all here are trying to do is clarify to those people who are not yet fully clear about it that oceans are central to our global ecosystems, and therefore ocean solutions are central to addressing the just transition and the climate change challenge, and very much dealing with the biodiversity challenges. So we need to bring all of that forward, and if we can get the development finance institutions to continue to play that role, to drive that role forward, we have something really important to offer to UNOC 3 and make it meaningful. The way we want to run this now, if there are any urgent questions to those three, we'll pass the mic. Otherwise, all the panelists will stay with us. They will just sit one row back. And at the end of all three panels, we have another opportunity to ask questions to all 8 of them. But I see Karen has a question right now. And there is one mic which we can hopefully, thank you, it's behind you.
Hi, Karen Sack, Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance. It's really interesting to hear the different initiatives that each of you are working on and how, through Cartagena, that's coming together. One of the things we are focused on is how we build the capital market for the ocean. What are the large-scale initiatives that need to happen by UNOC in 2025 to get there? It would be really interesting to hear what the ideas are that are coming from the DFIs to enable that to begin to happen, to crowd in the type of private sector finance that we need to see on the ground and at scale.
Capital markets for the ocean, love it. Who would like to respond? Barbara?
Yeah, preparing for this COP, we have looked at a lot at the various schemes around carbon credits and also emission trading. And having said that, I think the carbon credit market is so much more advanced than whatever is around nature. But there is an important link if we can actually link relevant projects to their carbon saving or carbon sequestering potentials. And I think that is crucial because investors are always looking for a standardized, tangible benefit and regulated, and the standards must be reliable. And therefore, this is a good start, in my opinion, to link it to the carbon markets, whatever relevant projects are out there. And I realize that it's not everything we're talking about in this context, but that would be a start. And around nature, we still need to define how we can measure impact and tell a transparent story to the investors. And I think there is still some work to do, to be honest. Yeah.
Do you want to add something, Ignacio?
Just, picking up from Barbara's previous comment on her first round about business models is something that we would like to go much deeper. And what we are seeing in other areas of CAF, which were also quite aggressive at the beginning of the conversation, for example, in water bonds or green bonds in the region. So we are trying to think what have we done there, and how that could open a space for blue instruments as well. So we are quite focused in trying to understand the business models that are already in place, because there are so many already in place, and to develop new ones, and to see how that can make a bridge in terms of capital finance. The one thing that we are looking is also aggregation, because we see sometimes, for example, similar but quite small activities that, again, there is a business model going on there, but to see if we can somehow aggregate to make it more efficient and actually with more appetite in the market to go there. For example, in small fisheries with conservation, also some very clear, very specific tourism works that are very well anchored on conservation issues, that sometimes they are small, but if you see the aggregation, there's an impact there that can be definitely be brought to the capital markets.
Thank you so much. One more question over there.
Hi, my name's Fahd from the Wildlife Conservation Society. I run the Global Fund for Coral Reefs program in East Africa, specifically in the Western Indian Ocean. I wanted to ask about the African market itself in terms of pipeline. Clearly, it's underwhelming. There's a lot of potential to invest in Africa. What do you think the challenges specifically are, and where do you see opportunities for investing in a sustainable blue economy within the African context.
Omar.
Yes, I will say a short word on this and maybe answer the last question on capital market. At AFD, what we are exploring is mostly blue bonds, trying to build on the track record we have on sustainable bonds and green bonds. So it's not done yet, but we have a dedicated working group on this. To answer your question on African, AFD has a very important portfolio in West Africa, and the Guinea Gulf. So, our, the main opportunity we're seeing on this is in West Africa. It's not that easy for us to work on this. We would like to work more on small-scale fisheries, which is a very important topic for us, a very important topic for, of course, all our partner countries, but also a very difficult topic to work on, considering the specificity of the fishermen and the dispersion, and because AFD is working only with public actors, so it's small-scale fisheries are difficult to manage because we'd like to explore this. We have already a small portfolio on this, but it could be one of our sectoral focus for West Africa in the coming years.
Thank you so much. Thanks to the first panelist, and if I ask you to sit in the front row and get our second group of panelists up, I'm delighted to invite Marina Mantanopoulou, the Conservation Director from WWF here in UAE, and Barka Moussef, the Regenerative Blue Economy Manager from IUCN, also in the region. So we now are really happy to have both of you here because you work in, would you like that mic over there? We have two great speakers, but we won't make Barka speak much because her throat is a bit in pain. So we will start with Marina, who is based right here, looks after real nature in the real UAE, so has all these challenges, sees these opportunities, and you've heard from the first panel. So I think let's start with you to give us your impressions, feedback, opportunities in the biodiversity, nature finance space right here on the ground. Thank you, Marina.
Thank you, Torsten, and thank you to Romain as well for the invitation. So as you mentioned, Torsten, for those of you who wonder if there's actually nature in the UAE, yes, there is. Just drive about an hour, north of Dubai, and you'll find an impressive coastal lagoon that is home to a mosaic of coastal habitats, including mangroves, salt marshes, seagrasses, and is a very important place for international and local biodiversity. And there's multiple other sites as well, yeah? And I think Torsten has also been there. We were delighted to host some of you earlier this year. Just to mention, I think it's actually really refreshing to hear all of you before. I mean, typically, decision makers, economic sectors, or even, commercial banks, etc., the importance of investing in nature is still quite nascent, and in this region even more so. So it's really impressive to hear your work about how you're actually diverting funds towards actual marine protected areas, which they don't necessarily have a business case for private sector to come in, and maybe they shouldn't necessarily have a business case, even though we do have multi-use protected areas around the world. So we definitely see that public financing and development financial institutions have a role to play to mobilize finance towards this 30 by 30 implementation when it comes to oceans. So that is absolutely critical and is not a nice to have. But secondly, I think from a WWF perspective, we have started working as well a few years ago a little bit differently, so away from the traditional conservation model, to start looking, okay, if we are actually to achieve sustainable oceans across the board, how do we support mainstream finance, shift away from the business as usual? So us as WWF, together with other partners, including European Investment Bank and others, we developed the Sustainable Economy Financial Principles. Now they're hosted by the UNEP FI. There are about 44 signatories, I believe, already on the principles. And even though they're voluntary, we believe that if we do reach critical swell, massive swell, we can actually drive some transformation, right? So there are the principles, and then there's the multiple frameworks to guide financial institutions in terms of where to divert investments for different blue economy sectors. So I think this is really critical. Also with WWF, we're looking again, how do we drive that mainstream finance and economic sectors towards sustainable practices? And obviously value at risk and risks to our assets is something that typically might speak to investors. So we have done a study a few years ago implementing that value at risk model, and we're showing some statistics in terms of, okay, where are, for example, coastal infrastructure, what are the financial risks? So I just have it here as a, I don't remember it, that was for myself, that for example, 66% listed companies are actually at risk from ocean-related risks. We found that actually in a return way, if coastal infrastructure invests in nature-based solutions, can actually reduce costs from climate change to about $2 trillion. So we're trying also, together with, of course, the whole community, to start putting those numbers in front of investors, in front of insurance, in front of commercial, entities, so we can start seeing what is the price essentially we're paying, that in a way that we're not protecting our oceans and our coastal ecosystems. But I think you also touched upon local communities. And we tend to forget that, especially in the global south, the majority of local communities rely on those coastal ecosystems, and they're most vulnerable. We mentioned markets, and we do want to, of course, see that growing, but of course we don't want to forget the importance of coastal communities, because they are the ones who know best, or traditionally, how to manage resources, or they see climate change happening already in the front door. So we just want to make sure that whatever comes from the market, make sure that coastal communities are at the heart of those decision-making. And also we create opportunities for the communities to shift, if you like, what they do as well from business as usual. So again, WWF is working in Africa, actually, with some partners to look at small-scale enterprises with coastal communities. So start developing, if you like, with the coastal communities, different types of business models that can be aggregated, of course, to reach that scale, and build their capacity as well in a way that they can have access to also financial instruments. So this is also for us quite important. What I would also like to add, that we mentioned about blended finance, of course, a lot, and it's very important for blended finance to come in for multiple reasons, and I would echo some of the points earlier. Enabling conditions. Oceans, coastal ecosystems have super complicated governance. If we don't fix that, we might not have long-lasting impact. So, of course, private sector is not going to finance that. We need that public financing to come in. Lack of data, lack of credibility, lack of monitoring, who's going to pay for that? So that's where, again, we believe that public institutions and development institutions can support, build that momentum. And again, with WWF, I think we have an interesting model. We have been part of a consortium of multiple institutions when it comes to more pipeline projects that they embed nature-based solutions. We have been part of the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development, so that is a sort of an ecosystem of players with the Dutch Development Bank, with commercial banks, but also NGOs, to help the origination of pipeline projects at the very early stage until they become investment ready. And I think this is an interesting model to show how partnerships and collaboration can help pick that up. Locally also, I just want to mention that in that coastal lagoon, we are essentially bringing all those tools in practice at the local level, because it's obviously, ocean and coastal ecosystems have to be local to a great extent. So how do we build that ecosystem valuation and natural capital into the local level? That's one of the work that we have been doing. How do we build best practice on nature-based solutions, blue carbon, but with communities and integrity at the heart of what we do? And in addition, we're helping the local government look at nature protection, SME creation through the sustainable blue economy model as well. Lastly, I'll mention something, since we're all here with development financing, that Islamic finance is something that has been tremendously untapped. There is a lot of sustainable finance deals, but typically exclude Sharia compliant capital. It's a $1 trillion industry that is growing super fast. So one of the initiatives that we are actually launching as well in this COP is with other entities as well as with Islamic Development Bank. We want to start that roadmap of how do we integrate, if you like, nature, blue finance with Islamic finance as well. So I'll stop here. Yeah, I'm happy to continue conversations with all of you.
Thank you very much, Marina. And I think it's so exciting to see how an environmental NGO can pick up on some of these key topics and how we can jointly develop a common language, a common approach to actually deliver this based on what is locally needed and possible, what's environmentally needed and possible, but what also is financially possible. And so this work and that visit was, for me, really exciting to see turtles and that whole existing ecosystem just was it less than an hour from here. So it's great to know that there is this nature conservation connectivity, and so critical that we keep those systems working. And as we develop the 100% sustainable ocean plans, to really put the nature protection as key part of that system and work with connectivity across where the sustainable business parts are. Barker, if you can speak for a minute or two, and then I know you'll have to leave us, but I think your title is already part of the program. You are the Regenerative Blue Economy Manager for IUCN in Africa, and that is really the pathway where we are going with this. We've worked with IUCN on multiple projects around showing that blue natural capital financing is something one can do at a local level. It is a policy commitment. So over to you.
Thank you very much, and apologies, I sound like a duck. But I'll try my best. Thank you so much, Roma and Torsten, for having me on this panel. As mentioned, I'm the Regional Regenerative Blue Economy Manager at IUCN Africa, working on apologies. Bear with me a second. Sorry. So working on the Great Blue Wall Initiative, which many of you would have heard of. And essentially what you mentioned, which is having a common language and having a common approach, is extremely important, and what we're trying to do on a large scale is essentially what we are trying to look at in terms of connection. Sorry, I might need a little bit of water if that's possible. Thank you.
They're getting water.
Or maybe a shot of whiskey.
Sorry, it
at
takes
this
a
point.
second.
Oh no, I hope you didn't hear that. This kind of collaboration and crowdsourcing for solutions is exactly what we're aiming for. Apologies, I know there was a bit of an awkward silence when you all imagine I might die. Thank you, but I'll try my best now. So, thank you. Yes, so I'm coming from the Great Blue Wall angle, which is an initiative in the Western Indian Ocean region that seeks to leverage both political commitments at scale and speed, which is not always very easy. When you're talking about leveraging policies, as well as financial commitments to underpin several layers of action. And these actions are being targeted at seascapes, which is essentially usages of the ocean that are not restricted to implementing MPAs that are no-use areas. The idea is really to bring people on board and to be part of the paradigm shift around how we use oceans. We identified that there's already so much human activity around oceans that essentially it would be almost a counterproductive effort to say that, we have to ban all human activity in every aspect of the ocean. However, we do need to try to get to the 30 by 30. But to also achieve that, we need to minimize the impact of human activity. And thank you. Solutions are pouring in.
See? And
Amazing.
ocean is the solution, water is the
ocean is the
solution.
solution. Yes, so we do need to minimize and transform how we're engaging with the ocean, which is why we are going for the approach of a regenerative blue economy. So what does that mean? That really means leveraging every layer of society, policy, and economy to understand the ocean in a completely different way. The first thing is local communities. I know we've talked a lot about local communities, indigenous people, small-scale fisherfolk. What we then identified is that they are truly the stewards of the ocean, but necessarily don't have access to means and tools to be able to effectively protect them. And what we realize is also that some of the information is not necessarily available to them very readily. Things that are quite intuitive to us in this field is not as intuitive to them. So what we've done is start the conversation on developing the first Ocean Trust Fund, specifically for IPLCs, which will take into consideration some of the social dimensions and equity dimensions that affect IPLCs in Africa, but also really prevent them from accessing the ocean, exercising ownership over the ocean. So this is a project that we're extremely excited about, and we'd really love to get your thoughts and your ideas on this and how to actually design something that would allow them to be the guardians of the ocean. And why this is especially relevant for the African context is that it is the continent with the highest entrepreneurial activity. And if I'm not mistaken, 2/3 of this entrepreneurial activity is actually women-led, which means that the co-benefits and the impacts would be quite widespread. Earlier, Romain mentioned that banks would not necessarily go directly to small-scale people, small-scale actors, but this is where initiatives such as the Great Blue Wall, as well as the initiatives that you mentioned, act as a convener to these people as an aggregator, where we can help to multiply the impact. We also heard that not everything has to be bankable, and this is a very critical paradigm shift because we keep talking about scalable solutions, but maybe impact does not always have to be achieved at scale. It can be achieved by changing the paradigm, one step at a time. The other layer that we are aiming to tackle is making sure that we invest in science. And of course, I'm coming at it again from a very African angle. Why are we talking about regenerative blue economy? This is really a whole paradigm shift. And it also includes technologies of the fourth industrial revolution, because now most of the economies will be knowledge-driven. And we cannot afford for one continent or one region to be left behind. It simply will not work globally. Solutions which are found in one part of the world will have benefits for the rest of the world. But what is needed is really long-term investment in science, which means also absorbing some of the risks, creating a policy interest in technologies that would seemingly feel out of reach, but in fact, with policy actors opening the door, would then actually allow private sector to perhaps come in, to perhaps see the process from start to finish, from prospecting to commercialization. And there are different policy dimensions happening internationally that we have to be aware of. The BBNJ Treaty, for example, one of the key aspects, one of the key areas of interest of the BBNJ Treaty for the developing world has been not just the conversation around MGR, marine genetic resources, but also around the conversation on science capacity building. This will require investment, and the earlier we invest, the better. And what this also means is that from a government angle, we need to really ensure that these conversations do not seem that they are out of reach, out of sight, out of mind, but we need to keep talking about them and creating the interface between policymakers and highest levels of science integration. And then finally, with regards to, again, last but not least, the African continent, and joining a little bit what I was saying on science, I was at a very interesting panel the other day on shipping from a nature positive aspect, not just the decarbonization aspect. Because a lot of the conversation around shipping has been on precisely how do we decarbonize, how do we reach net zero, but not so much on how is it nature positive and affects biodiversity. And what was interesting was the coming together of ideas. Okay, shipping is basically the vector for trade. Shipping can also facilitate illicit trade of wildlife. Shipping can also create very positive aspects of protecting biodiversity if we only can plan routes around KBAs, around EPSAs, around areas that are ecologically sensitive. And also science. How do you look at the life cycle of the products that are used by the shipping industry? Are they nature positive? And this to me was very emblematic of the kind of conversations that we need to be having and bringing together what really underpins those conversations, which is how do we finance those? So I would just join what you said, which is that we need to change the way we look at finance, the way we look at a very long-term perspective, and just work with what is actually needed by the planet, really. So I thank you for bearing with me, and I hope that we can have this conversation. We continue this conversation. I will unfortunately head out because, well, this. But thank you so much for listening.
Well, thank you very much, both of you. Excellent second panel. We release you to the front row or Barker out of the room to recover and ask our third and final two panelists to join us on stage right now. I'm really delighted to introduce Ariane Steinsmeyer from Aura and Melissa Garvey from the Nature Conservancy. You are both contributing to this transition in a very practical, meaningful way. Ariane, Aura is a coalition. It includes governments, it includes large corporates, includes projects. So it's really about how do we make this partnership work. And then Melissa, your work on blue bonds has been critical to unleash financing into the space in a new and innovative way. So I think having that discussion about tools, and they already came up before, and of processes is really absolutely key. So maybe Ariane, why don't you start out?
Yeah, thank you. Partnership has been mentioned before, and I think, I'm delighted to see so many partners of ours also in the room. So Aura is an alliance with more than 80 members now from the private sector as well as from the NGO community, academia. And it's really to drive the discussion here on Oceans Day around finance. So thank you for hosting the first panel here at the IDFC Pavilion on Finance, which is great and a good achievement, and to really share the examples. So some of the examples I want to share here are that building on some of the commitments we have seen both on the international level with some of the treaties, high sea treaties, the biodiversity treaty has been mentioned, but also then the call for action, which the development banks are now leading. It's like, how do we finance them? And so that is something where you set the road towards the UN Oceans Conference. That's where we are delighted to partner with you to really make sure that at the conference in Nice, we have some concrete tools to actually put finance into and not just pledge the finance. Although I have to say, all the records and the goals you are sharing here on your wall are quite impressive, so congratulations for that as well. So we are on this journey together with you, and we do that in three main areas. One is, I think it came up, project pipeline. So we have over the last years had several calls for proposals for smaller to medium-sized projects which are locally driven and really have that finance angle at its core. So we have over 60 projects now. 40 of them have a innovative financial solution which is community-driven, voluntary carbon markets, financial resilience, but it's also around sort of insurance products, parametric insurance, and some of the other tools we are testing. And so that is there, and I welcome you all to have a look at the great portfolio we are building. I know that other of the NGOs here in the room are building the same. And then how do you scale that? And that comes to our second pillar, which is around the missing middle. So some of these are, need to be scaled, but the private sector investment is not don't want to take the risk yet. So actually the Blue Action Fund and some other funds are taking that risk and funding between the 2 and 10 million more on the grant funding, and we are trying now to connect it with investment from the private sector. So we are pleased to announce today that we have an ocean impact investment fund called the Outrigger Fund, which is mainly focused on the SIDS as well. So that is a new angle, and trying to bridge that gap, which we called, the Delhi of wealth, if you like, so that these projects can be scaled. We also want to make sure that there is a blue marketplace out there where some of these innovative, community-led, but also medium-sized projects can actually find the investor they need. So we're building out what we call the Octopus Desk, which is a physical desk, but also supported with new technology around AI to actually really make that matchmaking happen in the blue space, which is still quite nascent. And so building up that pipeline and connecting it to investors is really crucial for us as an alliance. Within that missing middle, we also want to make sure that we have the enabling conditions in place, as well as guardrails and safeguards. So we have also been working with some of our partners here in the room, TNC, CI, the WEF, and Salesforce on high-quality blue carbon principles and guidelines, which I want to mention. We also have worked with the TNFD on really ensuring that ocean is part of that framework as well. And some of you also talked about risk at the coastal community level, so please also look at our Coastal Risk Index, which we have recently launched, which are some of the tools which help investors, especially also the private investors, to understand the risk they're taking when building their infrastructure on coastal communities. And so lastly, and that is our third pillar, which we really want to drive to have finalized by UNOC in a way that we have these concrete financial mechanisms. So currently, we're incubating ideas around larger scale financial mechanisms, and you, Melissa, will talk a little bit about blue bonds and other tools as well. But we are thinking about like what else is missing in that nascent space and in the ocean space, but what can we learn from the climate and green sector? So we saw that de-risking private capital is important. So we are now building an ocean risk company in that space to really be able to foster more investment, both also from national banks in that space. So that's what we hope to build and launch at UNOC. We're also working with a team on a Blue Bond incubator. So again, trying to understand what are some of the lessons learned, but also what are the key challenges with blue bonds in that space, and how can an incubator help with thinking through the structuring, aggregating smaller scale products, but really sort of also help to build the market, which obviously we have heard a lot of buzz about blue bonds here at the COP, so that's great. And then lastly, maybe to mention small-scale fisheries. So a small-scale fisheries financing facility, I think, is needed also to ensure that small-scale fishers have access to new innovative financial solutions, both with the national banking sector, but also the insurance products that are out there. And how do you connect that then to a sustainable use and conservation connected to the 30 by 30 target? So again, maybe to wrap up is to say there is a lot out there. There are a lot of opportunities to build on, especially also community-led. And how do we scale them now with bringing these financial tools in place? UNOC is a great opportunity from here to build these different initiatives and that have finance then pledged, so that we have the call to action turn into actually funding on the ground.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. And it does show how important it is to have these types of alliances and partnerships, because it brings the projects together with the large-scale investors and all the other market participants. And the DFIs are, of course, a key part of that equation. So Melissa, over to you. You've done some amazing transactions in the blue bond space. Tell us more.
Sure. Thanks so much. It's great to be here, and congratulations. I always love celebrating the amazing work that you're doing with Aura. So I want to just try and make some connections, connect the dots today a little bit on oceans, biodiversity, climate, and also where development banks can play a really integral role. So we all know that there's a climate crisis ahead of us. That's why we're all here. And I think it's become pretty evident that nature can be a significant portion of the solution, providing about 30% of the offsets for industry and fossil fuel use. Very important. And at the same time, there's also the tremendous benefits that we see from nature, in particular on the resilience side, and how intact biodiversity can really be supporting people, and that's so evident in coastal areas in particular. So there's the biodiversity crisis, there is the climate crisis, and there's this additional piece, which is the debt crisis. And so many of the countries that are so important to be, addressing the climate and biodiversity crisis are also facing the challenge of needing to, whether it's recover from increasing storm damage or other climate disasters, going into tremendous amounts of debt. And years ago, we realized that there was a correlation that we were seeing, in particular with small island developing countries in the Caribbean, between storms and debt. So it's not a huge stretch to imagine that the increasing number of storms, which were becoming more severe over time because of climate change, were then needing to rebuild and having greater debt loads. You pull back and look beyond what we recognized in the Caribbean, and we're seeing that the debt crisis is hitting the world, in particular after COVID. And it's so important, in particular in the places that have great biodiversity, and it's rich biodiversity that needs protection, and that can be done in support of climate. So we're seeing right now that more than half of low-income countries are facing debt distress. And we're seeing that of the 58 most climate vulnerable countries, right now they have debt repayments in the area of about $435 billion that they need to make between now and 2028. So huge amounts of debt that they're needing to repay, and huge opportunity to think about how those debt repayments can actually be redirected in support of biodiversity and climate objectives. The approach that we have developed at the Nature Conservancy, we now call it our Nature Bonds program, is a way that you can bring together debt refinancing as well as technical assistance, and that's both on planning and policy and science, and use that to help address the biodiversity finance gap that exists right now, which is about a $700 billion annual gap. Use that in support of countries to be able to redirect those debt payments in support of whether it's NDCs or in support of 30 by 30 objectives. So this is what we have been able to pioneer, initially starting in Seychelles in 2016, and then through 3 other projects in Belize, Barbados, and Gabon. Collectively, we've been able to refinance about $1.2 billion in debt and unlock $400 million for ocean conservation specifically, and in support of all of those countries committing to protect 30% of their ocean and manage their entire ocean space. Now, that's an area just with those 4 countries that's the size of the Gulf of Mexico. We see a lot of potential in this approach, and to get a little bit more specific on how the projects work and how development banks can be part of that, each one of the projects, they've all been quite different, right? But there is a consistent thread in all of them. They all have a transaction at the core, where there is the opportunity for the Nature Conservancy to work with countries, come up with some very ambitious goals that are related to biodiversity and climate, and in support of those objectives, we will work with the country to help arrange a debt refinancing. Now, the magic in all of these projects is development banks, and using the role that, whether in the past number of projects we've done, it's either working with the Inter-American Development Bank or with the U.S. Development Finance Corporation, them either working to provide a co-guarantee on that debt or providing political risk insurance. That credit enhancement, bringing that to a debt refinancing, allows us to get much lower interest rates and longer repayment periods, and that's how we're able to unlock resources for conservation and climate objectives. So that's sort of step 1. Step 2, we work together to put in place a conservation trust fund if it doesn't already exist in place. Those conservation trust funds can be a platform both for the refinancing resources to be shared in support of the biodiversity and climate objectives, but it's also a place where you can crowd additional funding. So that role is really essential. And all of the conservation trust funds that we develop in these projects, we require that they have strong governance and that they be independent of government. So we ensure that that can, help ensure the sort of the credibility of any of those conservation trust funds, and that there's clear and transparent reporting. So that's really important as we work with private investors on these projects, but it's also a place that can give development banks a lot of certainty on what they may be crowding funds into. That transparency is essential. The next step in all of these projects is, of course, to be working with communities, working with various stakeholders to develop the conservation and climate, whether it's new protected areas or policies that are associated with climate mitigation and adaptation benefits. So again, it's a way to have there be visibility and ensure that communities, indigenous peoples, rights holders are all engaged in ensuring that you've got that durable and effective climate and conservation outcomes in any projects. We were really excited to think about moving beyond just the project levels, working from one place to another, to think about how these kinds of approaches can be scaled much more broadly. And so we'd been working with this is a mouthful, and I always get it slightly wrong, but the Sustainability-Linked Sovereign Debt Hub in support of what has now become a joint declaration that's being led by the Inter-American Development Bank and U.S. Development Finance Corporation to work together to try and identify ways that credit enhancement can be scaled and these kinds of efforts can be replicated. We're excited and proud of the work that we've done, and we know it's the tip of the iceberg. There are billions that can be refinanced in support of biodiversity and climate, in particular for oceans. And we need other entities to be helping support that, and we need to make sure that other NGOs can get in this space as well. So we're really excited to see that next step on scaling beyond just sort of the project by project work that we've been able to do. Let me address just really quickly what are some opportunities for any of the development banks to get engaged in this space. And I'd say there's three that are really important. One, you all have incredible relationships. You've got leadership that you can draw upon to be helping both raise the ambition, but also raise the understanding of the kinds of tools that are out there that I'm working on, that Aura's working on. So that is those relationships and the leadership that you have is really, truly essential. There's the additional opportunity of thinking about how to be crowding resources into existing conservation trust funds that are being developed. That's such an important next step. And of course, the third would be working on credit enhancement. But where that credit enhancement may not yet be available, helping to crowd in funds in existing conservation trust funds can be another powerful way. So that combination of leadership, crowding in funding and supporting credit enhancement are ways that development banks, I think, can truly be leaders in this space and working very collaboratively in ensuring that oceans remain healthy, that they can withstand the future that we see and continue to serve us all.
Thank you so much. I think that was really an excellent next step of there are tools, we want positive action, let's bring it all together on a common narrative. I think we're almost out of time, but I would ask all the panelists to come up once more. And so if there are any final questions, these can be answered. Alternatively, we can have a final picture of everybody who's here. Thank you so much. Up, but anybody who would like a question to be posed, why don't you approach directly our speakers? And I thought this was an excellent discussion, so thanks so much to all of you.
joint business opportunities and project